Welcome to Inspiring Perspectives, a podcast by Think Parallax featuring fresh takes and bold ideas for the real-world sustainability challenges and solutions at some of the world's most respected brands and companies. I'm your host, Derek Sabori, and this is what sustainability sounds like today. Alrighty, Duncan Meisel, good to see you, man. We were just talking about your elm tree and sun coming in the winter. Where are you dialing in from, Duncan?
I'm calling from Austin, Texas, in the United States.
Well, thanks for dialing in. Thanks for being on the Inspiring Perspectives podcast. We've had some chats and we've been trying to align this. So I'm so excited to be diving in and having a conversation with you.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's really great to talk to you.
Yeah, well, likewise. Thank you. And you're the executive director at an organization called Clean Creatives. And you're a movement of advertisers, PR professionals, and their clients cutting ties with fossil fuels. I know you've got this. I first heard about you and from you while at Sustainable Brands down in San Diego in September. And I was really just excited to hear your pitch, your proposal, your idea. And it just made a lot of sense. And you gave us some good stats. And I think it really got the room just kind of going, whoa, never really looked at it that way. So if you can, tell us a little bit about Clean Creatives and what you guys do, what you're proposing.
Yeah, so Clean Creative started in 2020. And the way it began was basically I was here in Austin, Texas, and I was working with my colleague, Jamie Henn. And we were trying to figure out how to make some sort of useful contribution to the 2020 election. There were a lot of ads being run by the fossil fuel interests, kind of promoting voting against climate policy in that election. And so we decided we were going to look at some of the ads being made by the American Petroleum Institute, and we're going to figure out who made them, and we're going to make those people feel really bad about themselves. And like that was the whole idea. It's like just see if we can make a little contribution there. But what we found out was that the agency working on it was an agency based here in Austin. And they don't do it anymore. But and it kind of occurred to me like, okay, I grew up in Austin. I know the kinds of people that work at a creative agency in a place like Austin. They're probably pretty progressive. They probably believe in climate action, and their values probably don't look a lot like Exxon's. And that led to the realization of like, oh, that's actually probably also true in, LA and New York or San Diego where we met, or Chicago or Amsterdam, and actually any of the places that the ad industry is based. It's an industry that relies on the talent and interest of creative people who probably believe that climate change is real, should have something done about it, and that it's bad to keep destroying the planet. And so that was like a very interesting realization. And after that, Jamie came across this ad from Philip Morris, the tobacco company, and the ad was really bad. I thought it was so bad. I thought someone was a joke. Like I thought someone was trying to make fun of Philip Morris. And you kind of put two and two together. Like, okay, I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't want to work for this industry. And as in the case with tobacco, if you can get smart, creative people to stop working for this industry, they're much worse at persuading the public. Their ability to get their message across is diminished substantially. And that was really interesting to us because we had spent a lot of time working, to do things like pass the Paris Climate Agreement and stop really bad pipeline fossil fuel projects and things like that. And really, every time you're trying to do something good for the climate, there are these very well-run and well-paid advertising and PR campaigns to support doing something bad instead. And without those advertising campaigns, without those PR campaigns, it's a lot harder for them to stop the action we need. So it just kind of made sense. Like that was really the beginning of all this, was the realization that the creative industry is a vital part of the power of the fossil fuel industry, but they don't need to be. And we can change that if we organize people who work in advertising and PR.
So essentially, you came to this realization that you're thinking that, hey, it's agencies are working for fossil fuel polluters, and you're contributing to climate change, and you may not even realize that. You definitely don't want to be. And so your idea for kind of transitioning off of fossil fuels is to really wake up advertising, marketing, PR firms and agencies to say, hey, you can't, I guess for lack of a better word, be complicit in this, with them. We need you off of these projects so that the story can die. Is that fair to say? Something like that?
Yeah, I mean that is a short story. Is that the Yeah, I think it's actually very well put. If you work for fossil fuel companies in a creative capacity, you are supporting climate change. The reality of what these companies do is vastly different from the way they talk about themselves. In 2022, oil companies made $219 billion, a record amount. Um, they spent literally 1% of that money that they made on carbon capture or renewable energy.
Mm.
And a huge proportion of what they advertise and the way they present themselves is as renewable energy companies, and they are just not. They do not do the things they say. And because they present themselves in this way, they're able to get away with continuing doing the things that they are doing, which is increase the amount of oil, gas, and coal that they produce every year, increase the amount of dangerous pollution that goes into the atmosphere, things like that. And it's just not possible without really smart, creative people there backing the work and being part of that misleading, deceptive practice.
And I remember at Sustainable Brands in one of your slide presentations, you showed, sort of harking back to the days of the cigarette industry and
Yeah.
where their sales just sort of drop off, right? Once it was illegal, I guess, to kind of market and promote, then sales just dropped off because your point was it's the power. This is the power of marketing, that we
Yeah.
have that ability, right? Really interesting
Yeah.
and fascinating.
And so like what happened was up until starting at the introduction of cigarettes, and then up until 1970, there was pretty much an unbroken trend of the amount of cigarettes being smoked in the United States increasing every year. There were a few dips along the way, right? But it's pretty much a straight line up. Um, and in 1970, the U.S. bans advertising of cigarettes on radio and television. And after that point, the line goes straight down again. And that's due to like several things, right? There's better research, there's better communication around this, but just the fact that people are seeing fewer ads being like smoking great is it. Two things happen. One is that fewer people start because they're not seeing Marlboro Man, but also there isn't the same communications infrastructure behind them to stop regulatory action. And that's the things that have the biggest impact on smoking consumption is increasing taxes, reducing the number of places you can smoke. It used to be possible to smoke on airplanes, completely nuts. And all that stuff doesn't happen anymore because there isn't the same communications infrastructure behind them. There isn't the same ability to persuade the public and to persuade lawmakers that it's necessary to have these products in the hands of everybody, every living adult.
So interesting. And so even on your website, you guys do a great job of breaking it down, telling the story, explaining, sort of your where you're coming from. But you allude to, the IPCC report, right? The
Right.
Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, speaking directly to the communications and PR industry, saying that the media shapes the public disclosure about climate mitigation and that fossil fuel PR and marketing should come to an end. So this is what you're promoting. So I definitely want to talk about the things that you guys are doing, right? The programs that you offer, the reports that you're putting out there. But I also want to talk about this idea that you say agencies should be wary of the
Yeah.
possibility of assuming liabilities even for engaging in this. So maybe before we get to that question, maybe walk us through a bit of so what are you guys doing about this then? What is your approach? You've got the smoke and mirrors report, you've got the F list, you've got the pledge. Kind of walk me
Yeah.
through, the steps that you guys take.
So the first thing we do is we try to provide transparency around this issue in the ad industry and in PR because there's not a lot of transparency. People don't talk forthrightly about what's happening when and where. And so every year we publish a report called the F List Report that just documents as many examples of agencies working for specific fossil fuel companies that we could find. And that's a global report. We look at every country around the world that we can, find stuff on the internet about it. And a lot of that data comes from government disclosures or things that people publish in, industry journals and so on and so forth. So we think that transparency is really important for anyone in the industry to know kind of what's happening in the building. And that sort of leads to the two other things we try to do. One is we try to work with people individually in the industry who want to see change. And there are people who are part of professional networks, whether it's literally a professional body or just your personal network in the company you work in, and we just encourage people to speak their mind, to get the research about why this is harmful, and to begin conversations with their colleagues, because what we found is that a lot of people are feeling this. They'll have that inclination of like, I don't feel great about this contract. But they also have this thought that like maybe they're the only one and everybody else is just going along with it and it's
Mm,
fine. But the reality is that every time we've encouraged someone to speak up about this at their workplace or in their professional network, they found other people who agree with them. No one is ever alone in this feeling. And so we've just seen that happen left and right, and we have a whole guide of how you can make that how you can start those conversations. But the key is just beginning. And then the other thing we're trying to do is we're trying to connect with brands who have significant interest in climate action. Whether it's on just a purpose level, like they're human beings, they want to see the right thing happen because they care about it, or because it impacts their business model. So I was the sustainable brands with our great friends at Seventh Generation, who are really starting to look at the business connections that their client that they have through their agencies, their banks, their insurers, things like that. And they're doing that because they want their products to be clean and they want their products to be competitive. And when pollution is cheap, when it's cheaper to make things via, producing a lot of carbon emissions and toxic chemicals and turning that into cleaning solution, it's a lot harder to sell your clean product. And so there's lots of ways in which there are conflicts of interest between companies that want to see climate action and fossil fuel companies, and we're trying to draw those out and help those good brands identify where there is tension via their agency, where you can have a company working. I mean, even a company as big or significant as GM, which has a really ambitious electrification target, and then they have someone across the hall at their agency, McCann, that's working with Aramco, who has a really ambitious recarbonization tactic or goal. They want to build a lot. They want to produce a lot more oil and gas.
mm.
But in order to produce that much oil and gas, they need policies that make it harder and more expensive to buy electric vehicles, which is at the conflict of interest with GM. Their interests diverge fundamentally. So we're trying to highlight those points of tension because they think they really explain why there needs to be action on this quite urgently, not just for the sake of the planet, but also for the sake of your talent and the sake of the other brands you have in your portfolio.
Yeah, interesting. How about the smoke and mirrors report? What is
Oh
that?
yeah,
What
legal
does that entail?
liability. So basically, there are hundreds of lawsuits and legal actions and regulatory actions around the world related to climate liability that sort of are pointing out how fossil fuel companies in particular knew about climate change for many decades, did not tell the public, misled the public about the impact of their products, and then are now being sued for it. They're being held accountable in different ways. And what we're starting to see is that it's not just the fossil fuel companies that are getting that kind of regulatory scrutiny. Uh, there's also consultants. There's also, and starting to be occasionally agencies. There was the U.S. Congress 2 years ago did a big investigation into kind of the more contemporary forms of climate denial and climate deception being carried out by fossil fuel companies. What they did is they asked for exchanges and emails with their agencies, and you can see agency emails from places like BBDO talking with Exxon about these misleading advertisements that they were producing. And
Hmm.
so, you're going to kind of run into it's not always the case that there's going to be a straightforward, like, guess what, you're going to have to shell out for climate liability. But there is an association with these companies that is extremely risky reputationally and practically. And, the most interesting examples of this actually are coming from the opioid epidemic, where the companies in charge of marketing those products are now also being having to pay hundreds of millions of dollars for those cases. So one of the companies was McKinsey, which was worked with the Sacklers and Purdue Pharma to market the marketing strategies vis-a-vis doctors, but also Publicis Health, which is a big ad agency, is going to have to pay at least $300 million to settle these cases based on how they marketed those products. And it is not a short jump to go from there to if you're marketing these other extremely dangerous products, fossil fuels, in a misleading way, you may have to pay for that as well.
No, it's not. I don't think it's a far jump at all. And I think to your point, this idea with association, I was working with a client a while back, and at one point I pulled up some sustainability research work that McKinsey had done, and
Yeah.
somebody in the audience kind of pushed back and goes, "How can you trust that? How can you rely on that?" And it was really this being stuck between like, "But this is really good work that a lot of us have relied on for a while." But I hear your point, because of the work
Yeah.
they had done on the opioid. It was just like, wow, that was my first kind of eye opener to go, oof, this can be tough. This can really stain your otherwise, stellar reputation.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're seeing this a lot with this year with Edelman, and every year they've been putting out the trust barometer for
Mm-hmm.
24 years now, 25 years. And when you take a closer look at the trust barometer, you start to see some like uncomfortable trends. They don't really ever talk about fossil fuels, and Edelman has a huge number of fossil fuel clients. The only time they really do mention it is positioning climate change or like as a threat to fossil fuel jobs, which is a really extremely narrow fossil fuel talking point. And then all of a sudden, like Edelman's clients, who happen to be petrostates like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, they end up at the top of their rankings in all these different trust reports, and it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like there's no way to show what's going on there. It's their research, it's proprietary. They have their methodologies, but it does lend that sort of like, huh, I wonder what this means. And it is undermining the credibility and the public acceptance of, I think, that research. And those are valid questions to ask. If you have all these connections to companies that are very big polluters or countries that are very big polluters as well, you're going to wonder how it fits into your public communication.
Yeah, and you're bringing up big name agencies, world renowned agencies are on your list, are kind of always in your crosshairs, if you will. But so which leads me to understand that this is not just Texas centric or North American centric, right? This is becoming global. You've got this South Africa movement, et cetera. So tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about how this is growing and expanding. Tell us about the progress that you've made in the with the organization.
Yeah, so it really did start with me in my childhood bedroom during the pandemic because I was stuck there with my parents for a couple months in 2020, and it's grown to be a global movement with a footprint on every continent. So early on, we partnered with a wonderful group in Australia called Comms Declare with a very similar mission. We have Clean Creative South Africa, which is a movement that is, I think, really tackling the specifics of misleading messages there because South Africa struggles a lot with power outages and a lot of official corruption in their electricity system, which is driven by coal companies. So they're having a chance to really kind of dig into the specifics of that misleading messaging. They also have a lot of new project developments that may not exist in the same way as they do in the U.S. So there's also this new project, the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline, which is coming through South Africa. They've played a really big role in identifying the companies and PR agencies working behind that. So when you kind of start to scratch the surface, you find all these interesting dynamics that emerge in place to place based on what fossil fuel interests lie there. We also did a report last year called the Asia F List, which was looking at specifically fossil fuel communication in a selection of Southeast Asian countries, or South Asia and Southeast Asia both. And that conversation is fascinating because there's a lot of the same greenwashing tactics you see in the US or in Europe. But you also see a more explicit conversation about development, and fossil fuel communication is being used to shape development pathways to determine kind of like where money is being spent to provide electricity to people for the first time. And there's a really earnest attempt to lock in these old fossil fuel strategies for electrification and development when there could be an opportunity to invest in clean energy and clean technology that will work much better for the future. So the shape and the feel of the communication strategies vary somewhat from place to place, but there's always these like very constant threads kind of run through it all. And sometimes you'll sort of see them shift from place to place, and ideas that are pioneered in one place end up in another, so on and so forth.
Mm. Have you, Duncan, would you say, give me a little sense of, obviously that kind of answers my question. As you expand globally here, obviously this is gaining traction. People are picking up. It makes great sense. So much of our global carbon footprint comes from that energy and industry sector. So you're targeting here. How effective would you say the campaign or the organization's work has been? Have you seen agency kind of, what stories do you hear? Agencies who say, thanks, we've switched, we're moving. It's been an effective campaign, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of, I would say, second thoughts about campaigns that used to be automatic yeses. And like I said, I think a lot of people have had these concerns for a long time, but not had an opportunity to say more about it. And we are trying to make it safer and more exciting and more safe is probably the best word actually to talk about this issue with your colleagues. And there for instance, last year there was a contract up for Shell's media budget, media contract. So this is the biggest part of Shell's global marketing spend. And that turned into a multi-month news story about who was actually going to end up holding this hot potato. And the company that did end up holding it, which is Havas, is now dealing with a pretty big reputational problem where, we had 26 agencies in our network co-signed a complaint to B Lab, which has certified several Havas agencies as B Corps. And now that status is under review. And that's like becoming a B Corp is hard. And the risk of losing that is a really substantial, not just, reputational problem, but also financial investment. That was a lot of time, people's time and energy that is now kind of potentially on the chopping block.
That's
So
right.
I just sort of see the friction increasing. I don't think you can say for sure that there's been like, a lot fewer fossil fuel ads going out. But there are some examples of like specific places where contracts have been dropped, and I think that's been really productive. So my prediction is that it's going to feel really slow, and then it's going to feel really fast, and then I think there's going to be a big change in this all of a sudden, and that tipping point is approaching.
So I do want to get from you some of your takeaways, sort of what you've learned from this process, starting in your childhood bedroom. I love that story. Tell us. So, tell us about the pledge itself. That's sort of the focal point here, right, of the
Yeah.
organization. Is you draw people in, it's like, hey, take this pledge. Walk us through what that pledge is, what you hope that agencies do, why it's so important.
So it's so important to do because people need to know that they're not alone. You need to like make that visible, and the pledge is the best way to do that. And so the pledge just says, we are not going to work with any new fossil fuel clients. We've had some agencies consider it who have had past relationships with fossil fuel companies, or something current that they're just planning on winding down. So the pledge is structured in a way that you can kind of reduce your existing uh, essentially pledge to make no new contracts. If you have one and you can't just like walk away tomorrow, you sort of say, well, we're going to wrap that up and then that's it. And over 900 agencies around the world have signed the pledge. Some are big, some are small, a lot of different people. And what counts as a fossil fuel client is a question we get a lot. And for us, we say it's essentially a company that gets 50% of their revenue or makes 50% of their capital expenditures in fossil fuel production, transportation, combustion, or sale. And that, so there's that. And then there is, we also include utilities. So any utility that has 50% of their generation capacity in fossil fuels, or we kind of had to have a slightly broader, less specific kind of like trade association plank. So like we want to make sure that it was clear that like, okay, you can't work for the American Petroleum Institute and things like that. So the third part is any trade association primarily made up of companies with those statuses. And then sometimes you get new groups that pop up. We call it astroturfing,
Mm-hmm.
where you'll see sort of like Citizens for Responsible Energy Development or something like that that'll pop up. So we say you can't work for any of those front groups as well. So that's the basics of the pledge is not working with any fossil fuel contracts in the future. We get to have that for agencies. We have that for individuals. We also have it for brands. And the pledge on the brand side is to say we're not going to, in the future, we're not going to hire any agencies that have current fossil fuel contracts.
Wow. So here's sort of, on the flip side, is there an argument, let's say, for strategy? Can you do responsible strategy and comms work if an agency says that, hey, well, we're working with this company who fits this criteria because we think we can help move them in the right direction. We're not doing their marketing or PR for them, but we are doing some strategy work, and we think we can, nudge them and make them do things better. Is there an argument there?
Not one with any evidence behind it. So people do make that argument. It comes up. This is certainly the argument that Havas made about why they wanted to work with Shell. But Shell has known that climate change is real and that their product is going to cause a global catastrophe for 50 years at this point. They don't need another marketing agency coming in and telling them how to do it. If they were going to take it seriously, they would have already. And the only evidence that we have is that even well-minded agencies trying to do this work has only resulted in Shell, for instance, producing more fossil fuels than they ever had, and going back to their investors and saying they're going to cut investments in renewable energy. So there's just no real evidence that this is what they need. They don't need any more marketing expertise. What they need is a change in direction. And the best way to change a company like this is to not work with them until they've made that change. That's your point of maximum leverage. It has the least amount of moral vagueness around it. It has the least amount of potential hazards here. Like, you can just say, I'm not going to do this until you prove with your money that you have the power to spend, that you're actually committed to this. Like, please show me the money. This is old saying, like, money talks. That if they want to communicate that they are companies who are interested in changing how they do business, change how you do business.
That's fair. Yeah, and I can get that. Let's move into sort of the advice stage here, and kind of inching towards your learnings and takeaways for anybody that maybe wants to start a movement like this, for example. But for anybody, I guess, whether it's an agency, a brand, an individual who's kind of stumbling onto this topic, you guys have a lot of great resources on your website. It's very nice and organized in terms of, like, you start here, you just read, takes you out to some really good resources. But where do they start if they're hearing about net zero, the 1.5 degrees roadmap, culpability for agencies, et cetera? Of course, they're going to start at your website, but I don't know. Can you give them sort of a roadmap and pathway of how to learn more about this topic and dive in deeper?
There's a lot of complexity in climate change. And I mean, I would argue there's a lot of simplicity too. Like, we do know the people primarily behind the problem are fossil fuels. 3/4 of dangerous carbon emissions comes from the energy sector. We know the core of the issue. But the best thing for me, honestly, is to find some good newsletters and to find some journalists and experts that you want to follow, to just sort of like start to get your feet wet in the issue and like keep reading. There's no one grand tome that will sum up everything, but sign up for Bill McKibben's newsletter. Sign up for something like Heated, which is a great newsletter as well. I really enjoy the podcast and newsletter Volts by David Roberts. Like, there's a lot of really good people out there who are looking at this issue with a deep background and expertise, and just start reading them on the regular. There's no kind of one crash course. Although I will recommend also, there's the Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership, CISL, that I think has a really great course on advertising and marketing and climate change. So I think they're fantastic. But I think the key thing is just to get in relationship with people who are experts and want to and are keeping up with this issue, so that you don't have to do it all yourself, and kind of cue you into the key issues. Well, the last plug I'll put in is for we've worked in the past with and still work with two communities that I think are really fantastic when it comes to approaching climate solutions. One of them is Creators for Climate. The other is Climate Designers. These are two networks of people that are trying to figure out how to connect people who are marketing, communication, design professionals with climate solutions. And they're both like free communities where you can find people who are on the same page, get some really cool resources. But it's really just finding a place to start and getting in relationship with people who you think you can trust, who have their own expertise.
Those are great resources. We'll put the links to them in the show notes for everybody. So thanks for sharing those.
Please do.
Yeah, we definitely will. What advice would you give to others who are aspiring to, have an organization or start a movement like this? Obviously you've had a nice past resume of other things, but it seems like you're kind of all in on this. somebody else wants to create a movement, what advice do you have for them?
I think be comfortable starting small. I really believe in the lean startup model. And, for us, our vision, our goal here is that the advertising industry doesn't work with fossil fuel polluters anymore. But we had to figure out whether that's an idea that anyone was interested in. And so we made a pledge and we put it on the internet and we started talking to people about it. And I spent a lot of time at the start of this project cold emailing people, just trying to take conversations with anyone who was willing to chat about what they thought would work. And then, put that out in the world and be willing to revise and take that feedback. So we've rewritten every part of our website and our core messaging here over and over again, because we keep getting feedback on how to make it better. And that feedback has been really vital to our success. So I have the word begin tattooed on my arm. And that's really kind of the ethos of the project. Is like, you just have to get out the door, see what happens, and then see what happens next, and be willing to be flexible. Because it's about finding your people, and we've been lucky enough to find those people over the course of our work. We keep finding really cool and smart ones, which is a delight. I think just get it out there and see what the feedback is.
I like that. And just that idea of just taking that first step, no matter what it is you're doing, keep learning, immersing yourself into that space. What does the future of Clean Creatives look like? What does the future of this topic look like? I think you've kind of said, you know what the end goal and the vision is, but I guess this idea of if you could wave a magic wand and just poof, make it happen. And that way Clean Creatives is done. You move on to something else. What does the future look like here for you?
I don't know. I always sort of like trying to just let it happen. Like there's really no. I think what's fascinating about this is that we're always hearing from people about how to make the project different or new or doors that might be open. And so we don't come into this with a 5-year plan. We come into this with the goal of meeting people where they're at, learning what they need and making it better. So it's really helpful to us that people sort of point out where we might need to go, because who knows? There's so much out there that we could be trying.
Yeah.
And just having those connections is so valuable.
Duncan, obviously this is the kind of the issue of our time, I would say, for sure. This is why it's so important. What about other industries, though? If you're an agency, if you're a creative, and it's other industries, though, that rely heavily on fossil fuels, right? It's there are plenty of them. And that's an argument that some might make. It's like, well, but you're working for this, this big company, and they rely heavily on the fossil fuel industry, but they're a purchaser of that. How do you address that?
It varies a lot more, and really the cornerstone of what makes those industries a problem is fossil fuels, right? So let's focus on what makes those industries so toxic, at least to the climate, is their reliance on coal, oil, gas, and their byproducts. And our vision of this is like, this is the keystone of the climate problem, and if we can solve this aspect of the issue, we can solve a lot more of the other things a lot more easily. If it's easier politically, culturally to take steps to limit fossil fuel consumption, it's a lot easier to take steps to detoxify production of fashion products, for instance. And a lot of fossil fuels go into plastics. And if you limit the power of the companies that are producing those polluting products, it's much easier to sort of untangle them from everything else. And another way to look at it is like, there's a lot of car companies that need to do a lot faster commitment to electrification. But in the future, we will still need transportation. We will not need fossil fuels. And that's where we try to draw the line.
Got it. I get that. How about this one? What advice? I'm sure you've had agencies that have worked with you and asked you like, "Hey, I'm with you. We're signing the pledge, but man, some of our best clients, some of our most longstanding clients are in this space. How do we start? Is it just a clean cut? Is there a transition in that relationship as well? What advice do you have there?"
So, there are some agencies that can't sign the pledge but want to do better. And I think the key for them is to set a timeline, to say, we know we need to be out of this in 5 years or whatever it is. I would recommend sooner, obviously. But, there are some companies that have made, I would say, not fully responsible decisions to like fully wrap themselves in, these companies. And I've heard of agencies that have 75% of their revenue in fossil fuels. And I don't know how you end up in that position, but it
Right.
is not a great position to be in. And maybe there are some that like really struggle to get out of this. And I think, but the key is like acknowledging the problem and starting on it, and saying when you're going to be done, and build the plan to kind of unwind it. It's not going to be, tomorrow. But if you get to that place where you can start, then you're going to be much better off than if you delay that starting place.
Yeah, that's it, because that can be a tough conversation to have, but it's an important one, obviously. And how about
Yeah.
your call is for brands to come on, sign the pledge. What are the benefits they get? What do you see, agencies getting out of this once they sign and they come on board? They're part of a great community. They feel good. What are the benefits
Yeah.
they're getting?
We have a lovely Slack community where people are exchanging, job opportunities and conversations about how to be involved in climate action as communicators. But I think for brands, it's or sorry, starting with agencies. For agencies, the thing that people say that agency leaders say the most, that why they're excited they signed the pledge, is staff. They're so excited to tell their team and to mention it in their hiring conversations and recruitment. It's something that makes a difference to people who are thinking about joining your team. And my favorite stories are the ones where they sort of people give the feedback of like, yeah, we put this in the company, Microsoft like Meet or whatever. Like you put it out meeting and you get all this positive feedback back immediately. So that's always thrilling. Like you can see the impact on talent and culture right away.
Yeah.
And then for agencies, it's really the knowledge that you're working, or for brands, it's really the knowledge that you're working with people who are fully down to ride for your mission, who aren't going to be doing, for instance, things that we have seen and know are documented of agencies taking examples of work they've done for clean brands, putting it in their pitch decks to a fossil fuel company and saying, look how green we can make you look.
Yeah.
You have that confidence that your creative, your team is actually on your team and not going to, poison the well with the public by greenwashing or create cynicism in the minds of consumers that all the companies who make green claims are lying to you. I think it's just better to have that alignment. It makes you make sure that you're actually on the same page with this vital part of your business.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Duncan, in our closing here, anything to keep an eye on? Anything coming out that we should know about? Where do people go to learn more about Clean Creatives? We'll put all the links to all the things you mentioned, the resources you gave us. But what else do you want to end with?
So we're always excited to have new people join our community. Every time that someone signs up, it's really valuable to us, and we get so much from people joining, being part of our fun Slack community, being on our email list. I also really encourage people to follow us on Instagram. I'm very proud of it. Our team is doing a really good job of sharing things that are not just like, scolding or anything like that, but actually informative and useful for beginning this conversation. But the big thing we have upcoming in April, the 2024 edition of the F-List Awards, which is going to be a hour-long award show presented by Raleigh Williams of Climate Town, walking through some of the most distinguished examples of fossil fuel greenwashing and misleading marketing from around the world. So please sign up, go to cleancreatives.org. You'll see a way to get plugged into the F-List Awards, the exact date, where to tune in. We would love to see people be a part of that. It should be very funny and very fun.
Yeah, well, that sounds like the kind of awards show that we should all be watching. So a red carpet event, hopefully. So cool.
Fully virtual, but yes.
Yeah, exactly. We'll put the link to that and we'll let people know. We'll let listeners know when that's coming up. But thanks, Duncan. We'll tune in. Thanks so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Hey, thanks for checking out our show today. This show was produced by the team at Think Parallax, a sustainability and communications agency with 2 decades of experience working with companies at every stage of the sustainability journey. We are experts at assessing where a company is today, defining a North Star, and developing a roadmap to get there. If your team needs sustainability guidance or training, or you have a recommendation for a guest or a topic on the show, visit us at thinkparallax.com. We'd love to hear from you.